The strongest walls are brought down not by force but by persistence. These words were shaped into reality by our guest today, Additional Solicitor General of India, Advocate Aishwarya Bhati. Ma'am entered the realm of litigation at a time when it was largely male-dominated. And yet, she not only carved a niche for herself, but in the very process brought about exemplifying the fact that what happens to the change that we talk about when a woman works towards that change and that transformation. Over a career spanning more than 25 years in the Supreme Court, Ma'am has addressed questions of rights, equality, and institutional accountability, particularly where they intersect with gender inequality and lived social realities. Today, we are here to gain Ma'am's insightful perspectives onto the issues relating to injustices faced by women, not only in the domestic sphere, but also beyond. I am Garima Singh, your host for today, and I warmly welcome you to the Legit Podcast. Ma'am, we warmly welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity of being able to host you. Ma'am, if I jump into the podcast straight away, given your experience at the bar, it spans across 2 decades, more than 2 decades. And now that you have firsthand dealt with cases which have women majorly as the main victim, sometimes even taken as culprits, but what were the changes that you have seen that have happened across the way violence against women have been understood and addressed by the legal system? If you can talk about the change that you have seen in the past 2 decades.
So, Garima ji, you're right in pointing out that the journey of penal law and women has seen a lot of change.
Mm-hmm.
I think to give you an example, one particular issue that comes to my mind straight away is the offense of adultery.
Okay. Yes.
So adultery is an offense which has been in the statute book for ever since we inherited the Indian Penal Code from the British era, and adultery in its connotation, in its definition, what it really penalized was a man having sexual relations with a married woman without the consent or connivance of her husband.
Yes, ma'am.
So just look at the definition of how it was worded.
Exactly.
So if the man took consent of the husband, it was all right.
Yes.
Even if he was in connivance with the husband, it was all right.
Mm-hmm.
But and the consent of the woman did not matter at all. So this was the thought process 2 centuries ago, which continued, adultery was decriminalized by a constitution bench judgment not too long back ago, 7 years ago. Yes, 7-8 years ago. So it's less than 10 years since that it has been decriminalized. But it's not for the first time that adultery was questioned, the legality of adultery was questioned on our constitutional principles, on our constitutional parameters. So our constitution, we adopted our constitution in 1950.
Mm-hmm.
But adultery for the first time was challenged before the Bombay High Court, as it then was in the late 50s. And that time, the court did not see anything wrong in adultery, even as per our constitutional principles of equality.
Exactly.
It came up for challenge again. And, in multiple facets, at one point it was challenged as if the woman can be a abettor in the adultery,
Mm-hmm.
in the offense of adultery. And the court said, no, woman is a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And the real victim is the husband.
Mm-hmm.
So woman was taken as a chattel of the husband. So the mindset so it took less than 10 years back that the mindset, the constitutional morality really changed in a manner for our constitutional courts to recognize that it cannot stand in the manner that it is continuing, and it has to be struck down. But the same courts did not see anything wrong in it in the earlier times. So this journey really, this one example,
Mm-hmm.
as also the constitutional philosophy, the constitutional principles that we have, where for us, it is not, our constitutional principles are not cast in stone.
Mm-hmm.
The basic principles, the Part 3 principles, which are fundamental rights, our principles, as per a famous quotation from a Constitution Bench judgment, these rights are like empty vessels. In the part 3 and the basic principles, they are like empty vessels. Every generation has to fill those vessels with its own wisdom. So that interpretation has led us to walk on where we are. You know, another example of the POCSO Act.
Yes, ma'am. And it's
for the first time, 2012, POCSO Act was introduced, and sexual offences became gender neutral.
And it's
But the another example that we have is sexual offences of women, sexual harassment of women at workplace. The POSH Act.
Yes.
The POSH Act started off with a remarkable pronouncement of the Indian Supreme Court again in 1996. 1997, the judgment is reported in 97 in Vishakha versus state of Rajasthan, where a Sathin was gang raped for opposing a child marriage, for stopping a child marriage that was happening.
Yes.
And as a revenge, she was gang raped by the members of male members of that family.
Yes, ma'am.
That led to for the first time, Supreme Court laying down guidelines which would be like framing of law. Under Article 142, Supreme Court said that would be law till the law is framed. So, women, their roles in the society have changed. Their journeys have
Evolved.
defined where society is going. One half of the population wants to stand up and be counted.
Yes.
That has led to a good change, because they are now stepping into, they have been stepping into areas which they were not. Otherwise, you know, they were.
Which was beyond imagination.
Yes, it was beyond imagination. But today there's no field that women do not walk as professional, strong, independent women. So that change has been there, and it's a good change. The law has to keep pace. Sometimes lead the way, sometimes keep pace, sometimes, be a regulator, sometimes be a modulator, sometimes have to, but a regulator nevertheless at all times. So I think it's a good welcome change.
Yes, ma'am. And coming from you, it means a lot, because you are definitely an inspiration for all of the students at the law school. We look forward to learning all of this more from you. So, ma'am, building onto that, the Indian legal system today provides a wide range of statutory, protections for women, such as the Domestic Violence Act of 2005. Then there is the Dowry Prohibition Act. Then there is the sexual harassment, like POSH we just mentioned about. In your view, do these laws adequately capture the lived realities of violence faced by women, or do they remain largely, if I say, reactive in nature, that is coming into play only when a certain action has happened, a certain crime has happened against a woman, or do they provide some kind of prohibitive atmosphere as well?
See, as a student of law who has been practicing for over 2.5 decades now, my understanding of penal laws is that penal laws have to be essentially reactive. Policy interventions and laws which are otherwise from a social welfare perspective have to lead the way. They have to modulate behavioral changes, generational changes, transformative changes. But penal laws have to be reactive. A penal law will have no role till the time the life is going on smoothly. Law should stay out of our lives. There is no room and no role for law to be in our lives on a day-to-day basis. We don't want that. That is not how democracies function. That is not how citizens want to function.
Yeah.
In our daily lives, we have enough to do.
Indeed.
And laws are made to ensure that societies, communities, nations follow a rule of law without having to deal with law on an everyday basis. For a nation and communities, when we look at laws are still made with that broad Bentham's theory of greatest good of the greatest number.
Yes, ma'am.
So the laws will be made in that manner. Penal laws will be made in that manner. What the anguish that you shared in your question of whether laws have remained in theory or whether they reflect the lived realities of women of our times, essentially, because you mentioned DV Act, POSH Act.
Yes, ma'am.
I feel that laws have gone a very good stride in inspiring, modulating, regulating good behavior by the society. I also feel that our laws, especially on women's issues, are amongst the most forward-looking, most reformative, most empowering, and most liberating. The difference in theory and practice that we all see and experience is definitely there, but that is not on account of lacuna of law. The lacuna really, again, as a student of law, I feel that most amount of crimes or criminals who indulge in crimes, essentially crimes against women, when they are indulging in those crimes, they're not thinking of how the law is how the crime is defined in the statute book. What are the consequences? Most importantly, the feeling that he has, either he's motivated or he's compelled by a compulsion of life. But essentially, offenses against women are not meted out of compulsions. They are essentially crimes of power, crimes of prejudice, crimes of mindset. Because you can't be there. I don't understand, or I don't believe that any person can be compelled to indulge in an offense against a woman. Essentially, what I'm trying to tell is that theory and practice, even if it may look at differently, what the criminal thinks is that I will get away with it. He doesn't care how good the theory of law is. He thinks he'll get away with it. And for that, our law enforcement mechanism, everything from the beat constable to our judiciary, to our courts of first instance, to our appellate courts, we all need to strengthen our mechanisms and make it time-bound. Because justice today is being meted out with so much of delay that it is somewhere
the essence of it is getting so, even if it's not lost, it is so diluted. That I feel is the biggest disconnect. If the offenses were tried promptly, investigated promptly, tried promptly, punished promptly, or even acquitted promptly, there are a lot of cases now of abuse of these laws also. So even if there are people getting discharged or acquitted quickly or convicted and charged quickly, again, in the appellate structure, that will lead to a much stronger impact of these laws in our day-to-day lives. Absolutely.
That's the point that I'm trying to make.
Moving forward, like we just mentioned Domestic Violence Act here, I'd like to raise this question that, the domestic violence is often taken up as by people. They often critique it as well. They say that it is not a general neutral law, and I personally feel it should not be general neutral law. But then the critics say that when we already have the BNS or the IPC we already had, which dealt with the laws in a more general neutral fashion, then why was the need to bring in something like the Domestic Violence Act? Why couldn't we have just dealt it under the ambit of IPC and through that only gotten the rights of women established and the remedies meted out to them? So what is your take on that? Why was the need for domestic violence per se if it could have been done in a more gender neutral fashion?
So, Garima ji, you're right. Offences against women have been dealt with under the previous erstwhile IPC and now the BNS. It has continued. In fact, the BNS now has a separate chapter for offences against women.
Yes.
It's much more succinctly and poignantly put in the BNS. But I am still a votary of special laws for women.
Okay.
I feel that Domestic Violence Act is a great law. However, Domestic Violence Act is a hybrid act.
Okay.
It starts off as a penal of a law only prescribes punishment.
Yes, ma'am.
A civil law only provides for
compensation
or the restitution or remedy.
Yes.
It does not prescribe for any punishment to the
right.
Domestic Violence Act is a hybrid law.
Okay.
Starts off as a civil law, and the violations, if it has provisions for protection orders, it has provision for restitution orders, it has provision for maintenance orders, all of which are in the civil realm. And violation of those orders then leads to sometimes penal consequences. Domestic Violence Act also specifically defines cruelty in different ambits. So it deals with economic cruelty, which is otherwise not dealt with in the BNS or IPC or BNS. Sexual cruelty, which is, again, I mean, marital rape is not an offense in India, but DV Act makes it partly criminal. So DV Act has that unique transcending power because it is a hybrid act, starts off as civil and then converts into criminal. So it has a wider reach.
Yeah.
It is specifically tailor-made and suited to the domestic relationships that women find themselves in. It is not confined only to a relationship of marriage. It encompasses even live-in relationships. It encompasses all kinds of domestic relationships. Any woman living in any kind of domestic relationship, as a mother, as a sister, as a partner, as a friend, as a wife, as a spouse, as a grandmother, as a granddaughter, as a niece, any domestic relationship you can think of. If she's in a domestic relationship and she's meted with cruelty of any of the kinds, whether it's physical cruelty, mental cruelty, emotional cruelty, economic cruelty, sexual cruelty, then she is entitled to have her remedy under this act.
Can take recourse under this.
So,
this was not possible.
For these reasons, I feel that, and times will change. It's not like in our journey as a nation will be where we are today.
Definitely.
Our journey as a nation is also changing. We are taking strides in multiple directions. So this is in response to a mischief. There's a mischief rule of law, which indicates that every law is made to curb a mischief that exists in the society, especially penal laws. That's the mischief rule.
Yes, ma'am.
So once that mischief is sufficiently tackled and done away with, the laws can be amended.
Indeed. So thank you very much on that one. So basically, we come to this knowledge that special laws are required because somewhere the kind of punitive teeth that is given to laws which are penal in nature is not possible when it comes to restitution.
Absolutely.
So, ma'am, moving on, my next question is about one of the policy remedies that the government has brought. The government did a very beautiful thing about a decade ago. It brought the concept of one-stop centers for women who have suffered any kind of issues. However, I was going through certain news articles, and it's a very recent one, which says many NGOs have also brought out their reports also, and it is contested in courts also, that these one-stop centers are not really functioning the way they were intended to. So, my question here to you is that where, in your view, do the primary lapses lie? Going beyond the state, what role do we as citizenry and also as civil societies have to play so that everybody gets this awareness about one-stop centers? Because women who actually suffer the kind of crimes that we are talking about never get to know that there is some kind of escape for them where they can go and where they can get the remedy at first hand. So we as citizenry, what can we do in the process? And you, since you have seen things happen in the court, in the highest court of our country, where do you think the primary lapses lie?
So, Garima ji, I must start this answer with a caveat that I have represented these issues before the Supreme Court, but it's not like I have a first-hand knowledge of or experience of how a first one-stop center works. But let me still tell you, because from my opinion and my perspective of how I have represented these issues before the Supreme Court, there is a lot of policy intervention to sort of unify the interventions that are happening for women and for protection of their rights. So, Mission Shakti is a policy intervention that the government is working very strongly on. The only thing that I can offer from my side is that we have to appreciate that we are 1.5 billion people. there are going to be issues in working, in operation, in our walk and our journey every day. Like one or two instance cannot really define, one or two steps or even one or two milestones cannot define the journey that a person undertakes or a nation undertakes. Similarly, these aberrations must be identified. They must be plugged. The loopholes should be plugged. The procedures and the systems should be put in place so that the aberrations can be reported quickly, they can be acted on, and remedial actions be taken. It should not become the prism with which we judge the system. The citizenry should take advantage of those grievance redressal mechanisms, and ultimately our systems will only be as efficient and effective and efficacious as we empower them to be. It's the multiplicity of families together, which is what communities is made of. Multiplicity of communities makes the nation.
Indeed.
You know, there's one thing that Dr. APJ Kalam had said to the European Parliament. It's a quotation that I really like, where he linked individual righteousness to world peace. And he went on to say that individual righteousness will lead to peaceful families. Peaceful, happy families will lead to order in nations, and order in nations will lead to world peace. So while we want all this for our nation, we want all these in our institutions, we must begin from home, because a part of your question was also what we as citizens can do.
Yes, ma'am.
So we as citizens can follow our dharma as citizens in manning those institutions, in accessing those institutions, in highlighting the problems in those institutions to the right areas, and not judge them by aberrations. Systems cannot be judged by aberrations. And even a few press reports cannot be a measure of how a particular system is working.
So from having nothing to having something that we now have in our hand, it is upon us to build onto that. Instead of finding the lacunas or the gaps, we must try and fill in those lacunas from our side as much as we can. And we, being law students, are more conscious of doing that, ma'am. So thank you for reminding that to us. And thank you for that beautiful answer. My next question is more about, if I say that we have already spoken about the policy, how law must not enter everyday affairs of our lives, and we should try to use law only when a certain act has happened, instead of asking this question that how much, how, and what law can deliver to us. Now I'd like to ask you the final thing that, do you really think that women in India have truly been empowered so far from all of the policies, all of the, the teeth that have given to the various laws that have come into picture to play for them, to work towards them? Do you really feel that true empowerment has actually happened, or are we still a nation which is yet to reach a pedestal where we can truly call ourselves and call our, half the population that, yes, we are yet to reach that state where we can really call the definition of empowerment as empowered for a country like ours? Or do you feel that we are still lagging behind? And if we are, then what is the one thing you feel must be done first-handedly that can actually lead us on that path?
Okay, so let me try and answer it in my own way. I think on issues with regard to women's empowerment, liberation, I think we are a nation which is very strong work in progress. It gives me a lot of hope, a lot of happiness, a lot of excitement to see the journey of women. In my 2.5 decades, over 2.5 decades of professional life, I have seen journey of women. So initially when I saw women were in all spaces. They were coming in areas which they were hitherto not, part of. But they were 2.5 decades back, they were more like cases of examples. Not in huge numbers. But that is the biggest change that I have changed in 2.5 decades of my professional journey. that now I see women in larger numbers in all of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I somewhere believe that women's journeys are like relay races.
Mm-hmm.
You know, each generation has to run its part well
Mm-hmm.
and then pass on the baton to the next generation of runners
Mm-hmm.
in a manner, in a place of advantage so that they can run. And when the ceiling has been, knocked down multiple times by multiple hands,
Mm-hmm.
there comes a momentous occasion when the ceiling shatters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the last shatter that counts. Of course, the accolades always belong to that last shatter.
Mm-hmm.
But there are multiple women who have knocked on that ceiling before, which made the ceiling weaker and allowed that ceiling to shatter. So I'm very optimistic about the journeys. And I will tell you one more reason why I'm very optimistic is because of the change I see in our families and our homes.
Mm-hmm.
So professional spaces, women are there in large numbers in whatever areas they are choosing to go to. Even at homes, you know, I think women's journeys were clipped at home. Their wings were clipped at home
Mm-hmm.
to start with.
Mm-hmm.
So if you clip your daughter's wings at home and you expect her to go out and fly, that can't happen. We all need to empower our daughters. We also need to empower our mothers.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a journey only for the future generations or the next generations. We need to equally empower our mothers, our sisters, our friends, our daughters, our granddaughters, our grandmothers, our mausis, our buas, our mamis, our all relationships.
Indeed.
So if we don't empower them at home, and I'm not saying that send everyone out to work,
Mm-hmm.
empower them in whatever role they have chosen to play.
Uh-huh.
You will all remember your grandmothers or great grandmothers not stepping out of home for any work, but being the most important voice at home.
Yeah,
The buck stopped with them.
Right.
So empowerment doesn't mean going out,
Mm-hmm.
but empowerment means that whatever role she has chosen to play, her voice must count.
Yeah.
So that, and the, again, like taking you back to what Dr. Kalam said, the journey starts from home.
Mm-hmm.
Journey of how the nation is going to be tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
how we treat our sons and daughters both. And it's not just daughters.
Mm-hmm.
It is how we treat our sons and daughters both today will determine where our nation and where our world is going to be tomorrow. So let us take onus for that journeys. Let us be the change that we want to see in the world, like Mahatma Gandhi said.
Mm-hmm.
And let us embark on a journey which will give us pride of knowing that we have walked with our culture, with our value system, with a strong democracy. Look all around. I mean, look at the nations that have gotten freedom and started their democratic journeys around our time.
Mm-hmm.
They have faltered. Look at the geopolitics of today.
Mm-hmm.
Our nation is a shining beacon of a world power. Somebody that can inspire good conduct, good behavior, righteousness in a strong manner. India is a Vishwa Bandhu today.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the journey from non-aligned movement to a Vishwa Bandhu today.
Mm-hmm.
So that journey, and as India goes into 100 years of independence on its journey to become a developed nation, it will need all 1.5 billion minds, 1.5 billion hearts, and 3 billion hands, all of us, to build the nation that we want.
Indeed. It was such a mesmerizing experience living it and learning it from you, ma'am. This podcast didn't seem like a podcast to me, but more like what should I say? It was a musical experience for me, because all of your words were resounding so heavily in my head, much like memories from my childhood when you mentioned about how really the voice matters, and to what extent empowerment actually does not mean you always have to run out of the home and do something. You are at home, in your peaceful environment. You have the right to say what you want to say, to be felt, to be heard. So that is actually true empowerment, like ma'am put it across in
Well, I must say the credit goes to you, because I love speaking to law students. So, I mean, as law students, all of you are here. So I just feel like instantly the teacher in me comes alive when I'm interacting with law students. So I must say that it is because you are just such such pleasant, charming, and curious students of law that as a student of law who's practicing law, the teacher in me comes alive.
Ma'am, that's more than that what we deserve you've given to us. However, now that you have said that, we really want to invite you to our campus. Please do come there. Use our boards, use our classrooms. Teach us howsoever you want to. We'd love to learn and listen from you whenever you have the opportunity, and whenever you have the time. Give us that opportunity, because I'm sure being the Additional Solicitor General of India is no easy task. Ma'am is so occupied. I know that. I've seen that. So, ma'am, but thank you so much for giving us this opportunity for that.
Thank you so much,
Thank you very
Garima.
much, ma'am. It was wonderful.
To all your team also. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I am sure this has given a lot for our listeners to develop on. So please do think about it. Do think about each word that comes to you until we meet you next in the Legit Podcast next episode. Do take care of yourselves. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.